When you hear that name, John, what do you think about? The man who writes this gospel for us used to be known as one of the sons of thunder, James and John. And when you hear that title, Son of Thunder, what do you think that kind of had to say about John and his brothers' personalities? Meek, quiet, timid kind of guys? Pretty vocal. And not necessarily just vocal, maybe kind of like Petrine or like Peter, in the sense of maybe the type of guys that some of us can relate to, that you might be speaking first and then thinking, kind of quick, short-fused. Well, whatever it is about him and his brother that made them be called sons of thunder, eventually, you know what John becomes known as? He's John the Beloved, or he's John the Messenger of Love. You see, this guy's life is an amazing testimony, and just a little bit of background with him. We think of him as the son of thunder, but then we get this whole thing. He's the man who is the ambassador of love. But he also had an experience that none of us, I pray, will ever have, and that's that a guy by the name of Domitian, a Roman emperor, attempted to deep fry him to death. Of all of the disciples, we know that they all suffered, the 11 that actually stayed true to Christ, pretty horrific deaths. Well, John, quote unquote, should have been one, but the Lord intervened on his case. And because he was thrown into a pot of boiling oil and didn't die, Domitian decided, well, can't have this guy walking around now, because in essence, he becomes kind of like a Jonah type character who everywhere he goes, like, dude, you don't look normal. What happened to you? Well, the emperor tried to boil me in boiling oil to death, but God spared me. Wow, I want to know that, God. That was the whole deal with Domitian. He didn't want anybody to think of anybody else besides God as himself. The Roman emperors were all thinking that they were God. That was part of the whole deal for them. And when we hear about the Gospel of John, and you won't find that word gospel anywhere in the Gospel of John, but the gospel, or the euangelion in the Greek, it's a great word, of Jesus Christ, was a direct affront to all the Roman emperors. Because before the gospel of Jesus Christ, or that euangelion of Jesus, was ever heard about, you know what they heard about in Rome? It was all about the euangelion of Caesar. That word gospel really was out there. They knew what the gospel was, but the gospel was all about Caesar. And so when all of a sudden these guys, these Jewish guys in the area of Rome who are ruling over them, all of a sudden start talking about the gospel of Jesus, well, that's a direct affront to the ruling king. And so this was rebellion, out and out, just straight out rebellion. And these rebellious Jews were getting people, even Romans, to believe that Jesus was king, not Caesar. And not just king, but that he was God, not Caesar. And so this is an amazing time to look back and to see what was going on historically, and to see that this guy, John, at this stage of his life now, it was about 60-some AD when he was apparently attempted to be boiled. But then later in life, under the unction of the Spirit, he writes this gospel after the other three had already been written. Okay, and the other three, while they're arranged in our Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, chronologically, it goes Luke, Mark, Matthew, John. And that's not that big of a deal, but it is interesting for us to know that when you're reading this gospel of John, that you'll see that if you read your side notes on anything there, that it's not of the same nature of the other three. The other three are referred to as the synoptic gospels, meaning that they all have the same vantage point. But the gospel of John comes from a totally different angle. We must understand that the Gospel of John does not complete the other three because they were lacking. It's just a different viewpoint that God wanted to bring in. And the Gospel of John, really, being the last one, is the thrust for evangelism of the world. When we look at the other three, we see they basically are written to three primary groups: the Jewish people, the Greeks, and the Romans. But John's Gospel is really the gospel for the world.